Good morning. Hope you guys enjoyed your breakfast. We'll let a couple people come on in and take their seats. We will have stuff on the screens or on the walls, so if you're in a place where you can't see that, you want to go on towards the center or the edges of these aisles on the outside. My name is Sherry Jackson. I'm a news anchor at CBS 42, and I do want to welcome you guys back to day 2 of the FBI 2019 annual conference in partnership with the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. We have official opening remarks coming from 4 people. I will introduce each of them, but before I do just want to once again say thank you to the 16th Street Baptist Church, Reverend Arthur Price, for hosting this event and being so awesome in allowing us to be here and be a part of this history, particularly for this topic. All of us here in Birmingham recognize what happened here, how hate came right over here in this church, in a quiet place, taking 4 of our children, but also today how we are able to stand here and love, and how this is a place where people are able to grow as you all.
Thank you very much, Sherry, and good morning. Good morning. It's so nice to see all of you here today, and we're delighted to be here for this 14th annual conference on race, law, and community, sponsored by the FBI in conjunction with the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. I think I recognize many faces who were here today, so I'm going to be very brief in my remarks and just say how pleased we are to be a part of this effort and how important it is to build stronger relationships between law enforcement and the local community. And we've been able to do that in a series of conferences that have covered a range of topics. And today, of course, we're here to talk about hate crimes in sacred spaces. And we're sitting in one of the sacred spaces that was the victim of terrorism, domestic terrorism, in 1963 with the bombing, which we all know about and which was commemorated. The 56th year of that bombing was commemorated just a couple of weeks ago in this very edifice. And I also want to just call your attention to the edifice itself, to this structure in which we're sitting, and how beautifully it has been restored over a period of years. And I don't see Pastor Price, but he has been an outstanding steward of this facility, and I'm pleased to tell you that this tomorrow, later today actually, I'll be going to New York, and tomorrow the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute will be on the stage at the Time Center talking about the Alabama African American Heritage Sites Consortium, which we have been managing on behalf of the Sites of Conscience in Alabama, 20 sites in Selma, Montgomery, and Birmingham that played an important part in the movement and that have been, in many cases, left behind and have not had the resources to restore and preserve these important places of history. And so we've been working for over 2 years with the World Monuments Fund and with donors, mostly in New York and elsewhere, who have been putting resources into restoring these facilities and making them available for the public to view and to understand the history that happened here in Birmingham, Alabama. So I just thought I would mention that to you, and you'll be reading Sacred Spaces. We have a number of program presenters who will give us further insight into the issue of domestic terrorism and hate in churches, synagogues, mosques, and other places of worship that should be safe spaces for all of us, but too often have been the targets of violence and hate. And we're seeing now an increase in those activities, even more than it has been we've been accustomed to recently. And so we hope that this conference will raise awareness and also develop strategies so that we can prevent this kind of heinous crime from continuing. I want to also just thank again the 16th Street Baptist Church for allowing us to use their facilities for this conference. We're normally at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. We are preparing for a major exhibition that will open in a couple of weeks called Black Citizenship in the Age of Jim Crow. It is coming to Birmingham from the New York Historical Society. It is a landmark explanation and exhibition about the Jim Crow phenomena, which was segregating and persecuting African Americans throughout this most of the 20th century. And we think it will be enlightening for citizens here to have an opportunity to revisit that history and understand the history in the context of some of the continuing crises that we're facing in our community. So we're setting that up now, and the gallery has been transformed, and we don't have room for all of you here, and so we're happy to be here at 16th Street Church, and I would like to invite you to come to the Institute on October 18th at 4 o'clock for the opening of the Jim Crow exhibit, which will be on view until the end of December. So without further ado, I would just like to thank the team from the FBI and the team from BCRI, and also again the staff and Pastor Price from 16th Street Baptist Church for allowing us to be here for this important conversation. And for those of you who were here yesterday, I hope you enjoyed particularly the keynote speaker, Sharon Davies, who talked about Rising Road, which we hope will be coming to a theater near you in a couple of years. It was a fascinating story about a crime in the 20s in Birmingham that's little known, and I think we'll be hearing a lot more about it. So again, thank you all for coming. Have a good day and a good conference, and I'll now turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Our next speaker is Johnny Sharp, Jr., who is the special agent in charge of the FBI Birmingham Division.
Thanks, Sherry. Good morning, everyone. So on behalf of the men and women of the FBI's Birmingham Division, I want to welcome you all to day 2 of our 14th annual conference on civil rights. We had a very good afternoon yesterday, as Andrea and Sherry alluded to. We had a fairly sizable crowd here yesterday. And it was a really good time of discussion of a number of things regarding this year's topic. So, but first and foremost, I want to echo some of Andrea's comments. I've got to say a special thank you to Andrea and her team at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute for their partnership and friendship with the FBI, having this conference on an annual basis for the last 14 years. We couldn't do it without your all's help. So very grateful for that. Once again, I want to thank Sherry for agreeing to be our mistress of ceremonies again this year. And I also want to thank my staff at the FBI office and the FBI Citizens Academy Alumni Association for what they do to help us with these events and similar types of events throughout the community. And last but not least, I certainly want to give a special thanks to Reverend Price and a congregation of the 16th Street Baptist Church because, as was noted, this is hallowed ground we were in this morning. Because 56 years ago, this very month, this house of worship was a target of hate, which is this year's topic of discussion, which is hate crimes in houses of worship. So I read this off yesterday, so for those of you that were here yesterday, please indulge me, but I think it's very important for you that weren't here yesterday that you hear how we at the FBI define a hate crime. So a hate crime is a traditional offense like murder, arson, or vandalism with the added element of bias. By federal statute, a hate crime is defined as a criminal offense against a person or property, motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against an actual or perceived race, religion, ethnicity, national origin, disability, gender identity, or sexual orientation. So the FBI is tasked with defending civil rights in the United States, and under federal law, the FBI can initiate a hate crimes investigation if certain requirements are met. And those requirements are, there must be a use of force or the threat of force or conspiracy to use or threaten force or willfully causing bodily injury, targeting of the victim because of their actual or perceived gender, sexual orientation, race, color, religion, or national origin, or in other words, federally protected classes. And there is additional element or motive to injure, intimidate, or interfere with some specific federally protected activity or right. So those who commit hate crimes should be punished no matter whether those crimes are committed because of an actual or perceived federally protected class. So hate crimes are not only an attack on a victim, they are meant to threaten and intimidate an entire community. Because of their wide-ranging impact, investigating hate crimes has been and will continue to be a high priority for the FBI. So sadly, you look at recent history, you have a targeting of houses of worship, and it's become all too common. So it actually goes all the way back. We were actually educated yesterday by a wonderful presentation by Sharon Davies, who talked about the 1921 murder of Father James Coyle, which frankly I was unaware of. I've only lived in Birmingham for 2 years. I'm a little bit of a history buff myself, but I was unaware of this murder of Father Coyle, and he was murdered by a Methodist minister by the name of Edwin Stevenson, who was also a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And he actually walked because members of the jury, I believe if I recall correctly, the judge, the prosecutor, they were all members of the Ku Klux Klan. So very compelling case targeting a group, a faith-based group, the Catholic Church, which has often been the target of a lot of hate throughout history. And so it's very illustrative of what we're trying to accomplish with our conference here. We've had the Sikh temple shooting in Wisconsin, the mosque shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand. We've had the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, and then the Mother Emanuel AME shooting in Charleston, South Carolina. So as we can see from that, there's no faith tradition out there that has been immune from the hate that is perpetrated by some of the evil and hate exhibited by some members of our community. So this year's conference looks to examine the racial and religious factors linked to these acts of violence, how to find forgiveness after hate, and examine how the FBI investigates these types of crimes and educates our faith-based communities on how to better protect themselves. So it's my sincere hope that you find the presentations for the remainder part of the conference today to be very informative, and hopefully at its conclusion, you'll find yourself better prepared and having a better understanding of the threat and how the FBI performs its duties to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution of the United States. So as I stated yesterday in my remarks, I want to thank each of you all for your interest by being here today. And if there's anything that my office, which you will often hear me say, is your FBI, we're the people's FBI. If there's anything I or any of my staff could ever assist you with, please don't hesitate to give us a call. So thank you much for listening, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you. More opening remarks now from Jay Town, who is the U.S. Attorney from the Northern District, to come and give you his official opening remarks. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. It's always an honor to be at this conference, and it's an important conference. It's a great conference each year. It's on hallowed ground in this historic site. So special thanks to the Civil Rights Institute, the FBI. If it weren't for the Bureau, this country would not have the robust civil rights investigations that it does. And also to the 16th Street Baptist Church. I echo the thanks of them all. The mentioned the murder of Father Coyle 90 years ago. It reminded me of a story. One of the first sort of exposures I had as a young man to hate in a house of worship. It was an attempt in South Bend, Indiana, and the story goes like this. A number of members of the KKK in Indianapolis, Indiana, were going to come up to Notre Dame's campus to burn down. At the time, it was a cathedral. It's a basilica now. There's a sort of a hierarchy of structures in the Catholic Church. And Coach Rockney decided that this was his house, this was his campus, and he was going to take a couple of the football players over to the train station where the KKK was coming north and try to talk them out of it. And the conversation didn't go very well. but all of those members of the KKK, for whatever reason, found themselves laying on the at the train station on the ground as the players all egressed back to campus. And when the state troopers pulled up to Father O'Hara's office, the president of the University of Notre Dame, and asked to see these 22 football players, and they wanted to speak to them about the events at the train station, Father O'Hara simply explained that they had been in class all day, and they're in class now and won't be available until tomorrow. And so that was how Father O'Hara and Knute Rockne dealt with the evil then. But the harrowing part of that story is, how would that have been dealt with today? What would have been the response of the KKK of those same events today? Would they have just come back with bats, or would they have come back with bombs? Why would anyone ever think of a church as a target, or the 16th Street Baptist Church, or the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, where Dylan Roof killed 9 people, injured several others, or any house of worship that's been attacked in between with graffiti or guns or arson? I cannot imagine the depths to which one must sink to contemplate an attack in a church or a synagogue or a temple or a mosque, and the depravity and the wickedness or the evil, the unreasonable contempt for their fellow man that must assemble in that person's mind. So what I've learned in the 21 years that I've been in this business of law enforcement, what I can tell you for certain is that men can do evil. So how do we counteract that evil? And prison isn't for everyone. We can't just incarcerate ourselves out of all of the social ills that we face. But can we agree, for instance, can we agree here, of all places, that Dylan Roof never deserves again to breathe fresh air? The worst of us are among us, and we cannot just offer our prayers for protection. That is why we have the FBI. That is why we have our members of law enforcement. We must do more, we have done more, and we are doing more. We must say something when we see something. We owe it to one another. We owe it to everyone in this room to make sure that firearms do not end up in the hands of the mentally ill, or criminals, or felons. We have to remove the worst of us from among our ranks and return our communities to their rightful owners, which are the law-abiding citizens, who for too long have hid behind closed doors while crime and criminal activity lurked just on the other side. Folks like you, folks like us, we have to work together. We have to do it together, and we have to recognize together the evil that men do. In the hours following the bombing here, 56 years ago, just over, 1963, September 15th, I believe it was, the blown out windows in the church and the refuse with a bullhorn to thousands who had converged here, he began to shout through that bullhorn the 23rd Psalm. Now I know that at least some folks know the 23rd Psalm, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, right? God is thy shepherd. Now, I'm Catholic, so reading scripture is not something that the Church of Rome prefers I do, so let me respectfully put the 23rd Psalm into sort of a contemporary context from my perspective as the chief federal law enforcement officer in this district, how King David might word it today if he had my job. You shall not want for our best effort, and we are trying to lead those who can be led towards righteousness. Not only do we not fear evil, we are looking for it every day so we can remove it from the valley. The worst among us will not have a seat at the table, but will have to rise while their verdict is read. And walking together in the valley as one community, not a divided community, is the goodness that we should hope follows us all through the shadows, so we can worship free from evil wherever, whenever, and for as long as we want, forever. Perhaps King David would have thought that as well. It's just how I see it. I hope you enjoy your conference. Thanks for having me.
Those remarks from the three partners, I think, get us started right. Is there someone from the Birmingham Mayor's office here to speak, we are going to move on with the program then. Again, thank you. I think the official opening really sets the pace for where we're going today, and to know as a community member that that's what's working with us to help us fight hate in our community, particularly in our houses of worship, is encouraging. I'm looking forward to the rest of the day. We will hear first from Barbara Bosserman. The topic, hate crimes at houses of worship, the Department of Justice responds. Barbara Bosserman is the Deputy Chief of Cold Case Units at the Civil Rights Division for the U.S. Department of Justice. Barbara, will you come on up and will you guys welcome her?
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here and quite frankly a little overwhelmed by the history of this place. Thank you for having me. I am with the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division, and it is a prosecutor's office. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about our work, but first I want to put it in a little bit of context. A peaceful Bible study in a historic Black church in Charleston. Worshipers at a Sikh Gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. The only mosque in Victoria, Texas. A Baptist church in Sutherland Springs. A synagogue in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And a synagogue in Poway, California. These are from very recent headlines. And because it's so, that recency resonates with us, it is easy to think of this as a modern problem. But it is not. It is the newest example of an age-old problem. Now, we think about America as a land where people came to pursue religious freedom. We think of folks coming here to pursue freedom of consciousness and conscience. And that is certainly true to some degree. That is certainly part of our history. But it is not the full picture. And the very Puritans who came to this country fleeing oppression in England were not universally tolerant to those with different beliefs. In 1660, Mary Dyer, a Quaker, was hung in Boston simply for being a Quaker and for doing what religious folks do, telling other people about her beliefs and asking them to join her. Her death was not the first hate crime because the year before, several other Quakers had been put to death, and collectively, those folks were called the Boston Martyrs. Houses of worship also came under attack, and specifically, it was often their religions that were targeted. Just one example, a mob in Philadelphia in 1844 rampaged through the city because they were angry and hate-filled towards Irish immigrants and against the religion professed by those immigrants, the Catholic religion. That mob burned down a Catholic church, and they cheered as the cross on the top of the church fell. And of course, as everyone here knows, during the Jim Crow era, that rage was particularly directed at African American churches. This year, 2019, marks the 100th anniversary of an event known as Red Summer, a time from April to November where there were riots across this country, where whites burned down black sections of town and killed the African American communities, people, men and women in the African communities that lived there. There were 25 major riots and many minor riots. And those who know about Red Summer, and if you don't know about Red Summer, it certainly was never taught in my school, but those who remember Red Summer remember the large riots, the ones in Elaine, Arkansas, in Omaha, Nebraska, in Chicago, Illinois, and in Washington, D.C. Those were some of the biggest riots that summer with the biggest death tolls. But the first of these riots came in Jenkins County in Georgia, at Carswell Grove. And after a confrontation between police and the wealthiest African American in town who stood up for himself, a mob burned down Carswell Grove Baptist Church. The news articles of the day talk about men going in, guns drawn, of congregants throwing themselves out of windows of the church to escape, of mothers passing their babies through the church windows to rescue them. A day later, another church was burned in Georgia. And as you can see from the slide up there, a month later, 5 African American churches had been burned. 2 years later, one of the largest race riots, ones with the biggest death toll, occurred in Tulsa. It was the single worst episode of violence, including ones that occurred in the civil rights era in the 60s, to have hit this country. And in Tulsa, after an African-American man was wrongly accused of sexual assault on a white woman, a mob attacked the affluent African-American section of town, burning most of it to the ground. And including in that burning was Mount Zion Baptist Church. And you can see that church there, and it's a really good picture of the day, right? I mean, that's 1921. People didn't have cameras with them on their cell phones. Someone had to find the photographer and set up and spend a lot of time taking that picture. And the reason that they took that picture wasn't the folks from the church wanting to remember the tragedy. It was the white rioters. They turned it into a postcard. They sent it through the mail to celebrate their evil deed. That federal government did very little. Even though it was early as 1999, the Attorney General of the United States recognized in an argument to the Supreme Court that violence against African Americans was occurring and that the states were doing little to stop it. Despite that fact, there was little that the federal government could do because there were no hate crime laws. There was simply nothing that the federal government could enforce. If the states did nothing, there was not really much that we in the federal system. Of course, there were lots of folks, including my personal hero, Ida B. Wells, Frederick Douglass, and Rick Halbert, who were advocating for an anti-hunting law, but despite over 200 attempts to pass a law, it never happened. So the government had very few resources or ways to combat this violence. Now, if we fast forward 40 years or so, segregation and Jim Crow finally begins to crumble. The Supreme Court issued the very famous Brown versus the Board of Education and ordered integration of public schools with all deliberate speed and said separate is not equal. And things began to change. And they really began to change not because the law changed, because society often is behind our laws. It changed because civil rights leaders fought bravely in the face of being beaten, being threatened, being told no, at the risk of their lives, to being killed, and many of them were killed. They fought for equality, for freedom, and justice. As here knows too well the forces of oppression, the forces of segregation, the forces of evil fought back. And that particularly hit this community in 1963 in Birmingham, Sunday, 1963, when this church was firebombed and 4 little girls paid the ultimate price for hate and bigotry. It was a crime that shocked this nation. People understood in the North, and many sadly agreed with some of the viewpoints of those that carried out the deed, but they didn't think that their hatred would go so far as to hit a house of worship and to kill small children. The next year, another crime of the nation. As 3 civil rights warriors in Mississippi who had gone to Mississippi to register African Americans to vote, who worked in freedom schools, who were working for justice and equality, were killed. Now, what most folk remember about this particular crime is the hard work of the FBI in finding out who was responsible for the deaths of Cheney, Michael Schwerner, and Goodman, and the Department of Justice in bringing those killers to justice. What many forget is that this horrific crime that occurred with the assistance of law enforcement, local law enforcement, sheriff deputies who stopped these 3, who brought them to the local jail, and then released them, timing their release with the Klan so that they could be murdered, their car burned, bodies burned and damned. What many forget is that this started the church. Civil rights workers from the Congress of Racial Equality had spoken at Mount Zion Church, Methodist Church in Neshoba, and after they spoke, urging African Americans to come out to vote, KKK responded by burning that church. You can see there was very little left of it. And those 3 civil rights warriors who were killed went to that church to witness. What they were doing was they wanted to document what happened, to tell the folk in the North, this is what's happening in Mississippi. And it was on their way home from meeting with the congregation, from asking what happened, that they were stopped and they were killed. And in fact, in the summer of 1964, churches were burned throughout the South. There were over 37 church burnings in Mississippi alone. Now, because of what happened right here in Birmingham, because of what happened in Mississippi, and because of the advocacy of civil rights workers, both famous and forgotten, the first civil rights criminal legislation passed in 1968. I'm going to tell you a little bit about those laws because we still use them today. It's something that prosecutors in my office and prosecutors here in the United States Attorney's Office still use to prosecute folk who violate the law and who use hatred and bigotry to commit acts of violence. First is the Criminal Fair Housing Act, and it prohibits using force or threats to interfere with someone's right to own or occupy a dwelling if motivated by bias. And the biases that are listed in the law are race, color, but also religion, gender, and disability. And there's a burning cross on that slide because, quite frankly, one of the most common crimes prosecuted under the law is someone burning a cross in front of a African American family's home or the home of a family of mixed race individuals in order to intimidate them and frighten them. And that is still in this country today. You heard yesterday talking about how he had just investigated one such crime. The second crime in 1968 prohibits using force or force to interfere with someone's federally protected rights if done on the basis of bias. And those biases are race, color, religion, and national origin. The rights are simply listed in the statute, and the way that I always remember them is I remember that the rights that are covered are the very things that those who were protesting in the 60s were doing. It protects, prohibits using violence to interfere with someone's ability to get an education, because the Little Rock Nine and Elizabeth Eckler to integrate Little Rock High School were harassed and subjected to violence and threats as they go to school. It protects employment, to public accommodations, to state benefits, and to traveling on trains and buses, because freedom riders were assaulted and threatened as they tried to integrate throughout the transportation throughout the South. This is still a law that we are able to use, and that we do use, although there are some more modern laws I'm going to talk about that we use more often. So we had these laws from 1968 to the 90s, but at this point, no federal law yet protected houses of worship. So we had people who were protected, and we had hate crimes that were directed at violence against individuals based on their race or their religion. But we didn't have any protecting houses of worship like this one. That changed in the 90s, and unfortunately that changed because of events that happened in this country and violent events that in the mid-90s, there was a rash of arsons at African American churches throughout the South. Congress held hearings, and you can see from the slide that I put up, which was a transcript of one of the hearings, that the chairman said that this year alone, this was 1996, this year alone, there have been 21 church fires involving African American churches. This was May, so the year isn't even half over, and there's already, in 1996, 21 church fires at African American churches. After these congressional hearings, Congress responded by well, we may not know what Congress did. We gonna have the slide advance? Looks like I'm just gonna be talking to you folks from now on. All right, Congress responded by passing the Church Arson Prevention Act of 1996. And at the same time, the Department of Justice developed a church arson task force. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the Church Arson Prevention Act, and the first thing I want to tell you is it's got the wrong name. It doesn't churches, and it doesn't only prohibit arson. It prohibits violence directed at any house of worship, whatever the religious denomination. It protects mosques, synagogues, temples, any house of worship. It also protects cemeteries. Thank you. Also protects cemeteries that are religious in nature, and it protects any kind of damage. So it's not just arson, it's into a house of worship, it protects someone taking a sledgehammer or throwing rocks, all of that is. And it also protects people, because there's a section of this law that prohibits free exercise of religion. Now, this law was amended in 2018 with the support of the Department of Justice to be even more effective. And I'm going to talk to you about a little more precisely about what law prohibits, and I'm going to flag for you the changes that were made in 2018 to make the statute more effective. So the Church Arson Prevention Act is one statute, which means if you open a code book and you look at it, it's in one place, it's under one code number. But it really contains 3 different crimes. It sets forth 3 different crimes, okay? So the first crime, the first law that is in the Church Arson Prevention Act is it prohibits and makes criminal defacing, damaging, or destroying religious real property because of the race, color, or ethnicity of someone associated with the property, the congregation or the church leaders. So that was done because of what was happening in the South in the 90s, of church burnings, right? And these folks were going out of those churches because of the beliefs of the congregation. They might have a black church and leave the white Baptist church, the Baptist church with a largely white congregation alone. They were targeting that church because of the race and color of the folks associated with it. So the first thing the Church Arson Prevention Act does is makes that illegal. Now the second thing that the Church Arson Prevention Act does is it prohibits defacing, damaging, or destroying property because of the religious nature of the property. So I talked to you about that crime in Philadelphia in 1844 where folks were going after a Catholic church because it was Catholic. That would be prohibited under this second crime. Now, in this case, we do have to prove that the offense was affecting interstate foreign commerce, and I'm going to talk to you in a minute about what that means. First, I want to say these are the first 2, and remember there's 3 laws. The first 2 prohibit attacks on religious real property. So that, okay? Religious real property means that any church, synagogue, mosque, cemetery, or other religious real property, including fixtures of a religious worship. That was the definition in 1996. Last year, the amended definition, Congress amended the statute to broaden the definition of religious real property. And so now it also includes real property owned or leased by a nonprofit religiously affiliated organization. Why is that? Because Congress recognized lots of religious organizations have clicker back. Oh, okay. So now you can see the definition of religious real property. And what Congress recognized, and the reason it broadened the definition, is it recognized that lots of religious organizations run schools, have charities, run halfway houses, run all sorts of organizations to benefit the community that might have their name associated and their religious beliefs associated with it that are not the actual place of worship where folks who ascribe to that religion come to worship. And yet they recognize those places can be targets for haters. And so if a hater bombs a Catholic school because they don't like Catholics, Congress wanted that to be covered by this law. So we have a broader definition now of religious real property. Now the third part of this statute prohibits That's all right. I'm just going to talk to you. So, prohibits assaulting by force or threat of force a person's exercise of religious beliefs. Okay? If the offense is affecting interstate commerce. And now, under the new amendments, this includes making threats to religious real property. So it includes using violence, harming someone, assaulting someone. It also includes threatening someone, whether that's by phone, whether that's by the internet, whether that's an in-person threat to harm somebody. And the threats now include threats to religious real property. So if someone calls a pastor and threatens to burn down their church, that is unambiguously included. It was probably, frankly, included before, but now it's very clear. And the thing about this is it applies no matter where the worshiper is. So it applies if someone interferes with folks who are worshiping in their house of worship, but if someone is praying in their homes, praying in a public space, and someone uses force or violence to interfere with their ability to do that, it is covered by this law. Now, we sometimes have to prove that the offense was affecting interstate commerce, and I could give you a long, detailed legal explanation of that, and you all would go to sleep, and the presenters that follow me would be mad. So I'm just going to say that sometimes we have to prove that the offense involved the movement of people across state lines or the movement of money, which just means something is in commerce. And it's easier than you might think in the sense that if religious organizations are giving money to charities and that money crosses state lines, if they are selling Bibles or other sorts of things to parishioners, that might qualify. Now let me tell you about the penalties for this statute, because one of them has changed. I want to flag that for you. Penalties are pretty stiff. If death results, it can be life imprisonment or it is eligible for the death penalty. And it is also a life offense if the crime involved an attempt to kill, kidnapping, or aggravated sexual abuse. It is a 40-year penalty if injury results and the offense was committed through fire or explosives. It's a 20-year penalty if injury results or if the crime was committed by fire, firearms, or a dangerous weapon. What is new used to be, prior to last year, that anything else was a misdemeanor, only entitled to a year in prison if if a defendant violated the law. But now, what Congress recognizes is there's a difference between a minor, someone takes chalk and writes a slur on a house of worship that can be car washed off pretty easily, and someone takes a sledgehammer and basically destroys, valuable stained glass windows or something on an altar that is quite valuable. And so now you can get up to 3 years if there's no injury, no fire, firearms, or dangerous weapon, but there's over $5,000 in damage. It is now a 3-year felony. So that is the Church Arson Prevention Act. I'm going to talk to you about one other statute that the Department of Justice uses to prosecute haters, and then I will leave the legal section behind and talk to you about a couple of cases. In 2009, Congress enacted the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act. It prohibits willfully causing bodily injury or attempt to do so with a weapon based on a variety of biased motivations, including race and religion, but also include orientation, gender identity, disability. With offenses, we do have to prove that the offense was affecting interstate commerce. So now that you know the law a little bit, and penalties range from 10 years, maximum 10 years to life, depending on whether if death occurs or the crime involves kidnapping or sexual abuse, it can be up to life in prison, and all other offenses are up to 10 years. So now that I've told you a little bit about what the law is, I want to talk to you about two cases. that are just sort of examples of the work that the department has done. Now, I told you about the Civil Rights Division, the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division. We are a prosecutor's office, so we're not just folks in DC that like talk to folk on the phone and advise them from far away. We send folks to communities. We work hand in glove with our assistant United States attorneys and the United States attorneys in every district that we go to. We just come in and work alone. The partnership is extremely important. And we work with wonderful FBI partners who have just done amazing work. And I will tell you, I don't have the opportunity to come to this. This is my first time in Birmingham. But there are some folk in my office who come in. I just want to tell you, you are the FBI U.S. Attorney's Office here. They have been magnificent partners, educated, knowledgeable, and very concerned with cases in this community. Just the talk to my office into Birmingham has come back extraordinarily impressed. The action and hard work of the federal United States attorneys in AUSAs on the ground. So I don't always get to say that. Y'all are really, really lucky. So I want to talk to you about two cases that my office has been involved in with United States attorney offices and FBI offices across the country. First, of course, is the Dylann Roof case. On a June evening, Charleston, Bible study began at an African church. It was an extremely important church. It had been around since the early 19th century. A very famous slave revolt led by Dan Vesey. Those individuals who led the revolt had a plan in creating Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston. And it was Bible study night, and the pastor noticed a young white man. He was the only white person in the church. Everyone else was African American, but they welcomed him with open arms. He participated in Bible study with them. He prayed with them. But during the final prayers, he took out a firearm, shot the pastor, shot an assistant pastor who did the first pastor's aid. He then rose, shooting at congregants. There were tables laid, some of them were hiding under those tables. Deliberately, calmly shot them and walked out of that church, leaving 9 people dead or dying, and others injured. It was not a mystery why he committed that crime. His explicit stated goal: increase racial across the nation, and to seek retribution for what he, in his warped mind, thought were wrongs African Americans had done to the white community. And he deliberately chose Mother Emanuel because of its history. He said he thought it would make the greatest wave. He wanted a race war and a church, both because he hated people who worship in it and because he wanted to inflame the nation. My office, working with the United States Attorney's Office and very, very dedicated men and women at the FBI, federal agencies, and local law enforcement, taken a night, and on December 15, 2016, a federal jury convicted the defendant of 30 crimes, including the crimes that I talked to you about: violations of people's ability to freely exercise their religious freedom by worshiping at the church, and violation of the Shepherd-Bird Act for intentionally causing bodily injury because of race. He was charged with causing death, and he was sentenced to death. Now, it can get really grim when we start talking about all of these horrific crimes. But I was here yesterday when Pastor Price talked about how this church was so resilient after the event of 1963, after Birmingham's. And similarly, the folks in the congregation of Mother Emanuel have shown incredible resilience. They have planned a memorial garden. They have events every year, but folks still worship in that church. It hasn't cut it down. It hasn't stopped their faith. Now, the second case that I want to talk to you about is United States versus Perez. This is arson at a mosque in Victoria, Texas. Now, this mosque, much like Mother Emanuel, it wasn't just a place of worship. It was a place of unity. It was a place where folks came to celebrate all of life's events, marriages, births, came together to mourn together for funerals. And they would potluck, where folks simply exchanged meetings on a human level. And in January 2017, the defendant in that church, that mosque, to ground. He started the fire in a place where they kept the Qurans. He actually was so filled with hate against Muslims that of all of the places in the mosque he could start a fire, started it by burning the holiest books of the religion. And he said, one of the people who was assisting in this, and who knew about it, he said he wanted to send a message, and that message was, Muslims are not welcome in this community. When he set the fire, he broke in through the back door. He stole from the mosque. He not only went through the sacred spaces and burned the Qurans, but he actually stole laptops and other electronic devices. After making sure he was safe, he escaped, and then he stood and watched as the heroic firefighters built that blaze at the cost of their lives. The defendant had indicated a hatred of Muslims. He had very inflammatory internet posts that I was going to not talk about. I'm not going to. It's very offensive. It was clear that was the reason for his attack. Now, from my office, along with the local United States FBI, immediately jumped into the investigation and found additional proof of his bias. And it's always important. I think folks sometimes say, well, if he burned a mosque, it must be really easy to tell the jury that he was biased against Muslims. But now he's going to say something different. It was covering up for a robbery. It was an accident, whatever. And so we always look to find additional evidence of bias motivation, and we were, in fact, able to find it. And Mr. Perez tried, he was found guilty of federal hate crimes, and he was fired in the commission of felony and of possession of an unregistered drug device in connection with earlier domestic violence. And for all of these, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. And again, the community in Victoria, Texas was extremely resilient. the mosque had been, there was a funding page, people from around the world contributed to the rebuilding. And I think that it is important for us to recognize, because I'm filled with despair. I think there are hundreds of haters, hundreds of bigoted people who want to harm us. And it's something encouraging to remember that there are hundreds of thousands of good people who want to embrace the communities that have been traumatized and provide resources, whether that be money, whether that be open homes, whether that be sending food, whether that we just want to reach out to those communities and help them. And some folks yesterday said, love is stronger than hate, and I've seen that again and again. These terrible acts, communities coming together, both the local community embracing its own, community of humanity embracing its own. I think that's worth acknowledging. Now, I've talked to you about two cases. I want to say those are just examples. Federal indictments have issued in many, many other cases, including the Tree of Life incident in Pittsburgh and the incident in Poway, California. Because those are ongoing and there have been no trials, I'm not going to speak about them. But the federal government is very, very vigilant about these sorts of crimes. Now, you may be saying to me, well, Barbara, that's wonderful. I'm glad that the federal government takes these crimes seriously and prosecutes folks after they've been committed. But what about prevention? What can we do? Is the federal government doing anything to help make sure that these and the answer is yes. There are a few resources I want to point you to, and I'm sorry I can't put them up. Next slide, actually. 2 slides. That one. So, Community Relations Service is a component of the Department of Justice that can come to communities and help both before and after an incident. One of the things they try to do is bring communities together, bring people of varying faiths together, bring people of different cultures and different points of view together. And they have a program on protecting places of worship that you can get to from this. You put in CRS places of worship into your browser. You will. The FBI also resources. They're here, so I'm going to talk to you about what they have. I saw a table last night at the reception that was full of wonderful material. They're here. You should talk to them about all of the resources they have. And there's also a resource page from FEMA that has all links to all different resources for protecting houses of worship, both protecting them from things like active shooters and bombings, but also protecting them against natural disasters. So that is a page that those of you might want to look at. In my I've been talking because I'm going to prosecute this about preventing crimes. I think a lot of us are aware that there are sometimes ugly incidents that don't rise to the level of a crime, but involve harassment or discrimination. The Civil Rights Division has sections that work on those as well. We have a employment section that works on discrimination, education that works on education, discrimination, education, file lawsuits or take other remedial action. And there is specifically now in our front office a special counsel for religious discrimination named Eric Treen. He is someone that can help if you think your house of worship is facing some sort of discrimination, zoning by someone harassing you, and you don't think it's a crime, but it's wrong. You can reach out to him. And then finally, I want to make love for the justice as a hate crime. This area is very new. We put it together in the last year or so because we met with a bunch of community leaders like yourselves who said, we want a place where we can go kind of one-stop shopping to look at information about hate. All of our If there's been an indictment, if there's been a conviction, if there's been a sentencing, that will be on there. There are also there's some information about preventing steps that you can prevent hate crimes, information about all of the resources, and you can get to that and through that, and hopefully that will be helpful. Basically, my talk on houses of worship. Right before I leave, I do want to say I am also, as I was introduced, the deputy chief of the cold case unit. We look into murders that were motivated by bias or were otherwise a civil rights crime happened before. I just take this opportunity because we're in front of you to say if you know of any such case that is unresolved, meaning someone has not been brought to justice, I wonder about it. Please contact me, or I'm sure if you contact the local office, they will make sure that they put you in touch with me. But I didn't want to make a presentation and not make a pitch for my case unit. So much, it is truly an honor. If there's anything to do for you, do not hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Barbara, and how about the shout out for the Birmingham Division? How they are getting the next up, Birmingham's Jewish Community Conference. T.K. Thorne, the author and retired officer, will present on that.
Yes. Wait, don't leave here. Which way was I? I'm not good at it. Okay. Because I myself on this. Me in the back. Okay, great. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for inviting me here. Slight correction program is about last chance justice. That's not what I was asked to do, but there's a book that I've written. So, my topic is Birmingham's Jewish Community Confronts Hate.
Yeah.
Complicated. Mixed Jews in the South, and you have a lot of complications. Jews migrated to Alabama as early as 1785, but they didn't arrive here until 1873. It was just shortly after the founding of the city. In the South, where African Americans were relegated to class citizens and every aspect of desegregation, Jews were generally considered as being part of the white community and enjoyed the benefits of that. That said, it is, of course, more complicated. Historian David Bofield has argued that the South has always been ambivalent about Jews. Though not subject to Jim Crow laws, they were allowed in some social organizations. Jews were often considered a race as opposed to a religion, and their whiteness often wobbled in a gray area. Southerners had a love-hate relationship with Jews. Religious when cast as Christ killers and present them as the chosen people of the Bible. This illogical logic illustrates the principle of prejudice working on a scale of otherness. Illustrated on one end loving relationships, and African American domestic help in the families they worked for. Another step of the toleration, scorn attitude towards Negroes in general, at least as long as they stayed in their place. And at the far end, hatred, fear, and violence, outsiders who stir up trouble. Similarly, whites in the South, for the most part, consider their Jewish neighbors to be okay folks, but those other Jews, ones who were communists, Yankees, or those that believe control in entertainment, banking, or government things were dangerous. This fear of otherness was reflected in 1909 with the fact that that Jews were part of the forward NAACP, thus labeling all Jews in the minds of critics as dangerous, set on upending status quo. The primary anti-Semitic groups that were active in Birmingham in the 1950s were the Ku Klux Klan and the National States Right. Klan officially disliked Jews. During the first half of the 20th century, did not have a record of targeting or arresting a particular. All promised a Jewish attorney here in Birmingham attributes this primarily to one man, Joe Denneberg. Denneberg moved to Birmingham, Alabama in 1922 after serving in World War I. He married into the Levy family, which owned Levy's Pawn Shop in downtown Birmingham. Everyone called him Joe. Members frequented his shop as customers. Perhaps because of military service, they developed a respectful relationship with Cousin Joe. Friedman recalled that if a kinsman found a grief with something that a Jewish person was doing about to do, they would go see Joe. Joe would get settled. If a Jewish person complained that they were being bothered by Joe would get it solved. Regardless of whether Cousin Joe single-handedly kept the relationship between the Klan and Birmingham Jews on ground, the Klan focused on keeping African Americans, especially World War II veterans, who returned from the war with the water of the world and desired a piece of it, crossing the invisible but real lines separating them from society. Nevertheless, some Jews, so they had worked hard of the weave of the community, were always aware that they were those lines. This examples arose to keep them on issue. Leo Fry, a Southern Jew, was only convicted for rape, a young girl, and lynched by an angry mob out of Georgia in 1959. Or in 1931, the Scottsboro Boy trials, which triggered anti-Semitism when 9 teenage blacks falsely accused of white women were represented by Northern Jewish lawyer Samuel Lebowitz, hired by the Communist Party and the NAACP. There we go. Before the internet, things went viral in different ways. In 1984, purchased the Dearborn Independent and published 91 issues of articles claiming that Jewish was infecting America. He attributed all evil to Jews and Jewish capitalists. He bound articles and distributed half a billion copies to this vast network of partnerships available for customers. That's not the right slide. There we go. a Russian fantasy called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a notorious forgery that claimed the existence of an international Jewish conspiracy to control the world. Ford printed it as a fact in his paper as one of the famous men in America. Ford legitimized anti-Semitism. During the Depression lead up to World War II, ironically, by a Catholic priest, Charles Coughlin, spewed more anti-Semitic rhetoric in a weekly broadcast that reached approximately 30 million Americans. Coughlin blamed the economic hardship of his listeners during the Depression on Jewish violence. In the 1930s, New York, unable in the mining and steel industry here in Birmingham, members of the U.S. Communist Party, several of whom were Jews, came to help break down that wall. Part of a stated goal to the nation and encourage African American members to be recruited to their party. In fact, Birmingham was elected as original southern headquarters of the Communist Party, which eventually played an important role in establishing the successful but short-lived unions. Southerners thus linked Jews with the great America's great enemy, communism. But looming over all of that was the shadow of what was happening to Jews in Hitler's Nazi regime. How one of the world's cultured and progressive nations where Jews flourished for centuries had turned on them overnight, blaming them for the country's woes and sought to literally exterminate them. Jews listened with growing fear as they heard the same rhetoric and hate building in the United States. After the war creation of the State of Israel in 1948, Jews were often suspected of loyalties. Today, when the United States President spoke to a gathering of American Jews about Israel and referred to that country's leader as your Prime Minister. Catholics would likewise suspect as having a primary allegiance to the Pope, legislation to gather and to forbid gathering in public while wearing masks, other than Halloween, of course. And this is a law which remains on the state books today. Or Robert and Betty Loeb, who left to boycott a local radio station that had given a program to one of the most strident voices against discrimination, Asa Ace Carter. The station's subsequent War Mervyn Stern, who in 1950 co-founded and co-chaired a prominent biracial committee, part of a larger consortium to women and address community challenges. Stern also helped organize an education institute on race relations in the 50s, hosted by Birmingham College, that was attended by hundreds of people, with Africans and whites sitting pro laws. It determined the separate but equal standard in education. It was not constitutional. Blacks and white children would have to attend school together. By far, the issue of civil immigration started what was considered the ultimate fear of those leading to keeping the races separated, that of racial mixing. And if you find it confusing, since white men had been mixing with black women since slave days, perhaps this picture